college football off and running, man. Big game this week, of course. Not only Indiana-Cincinnati, there's a lot of big games this week, but of course in Bloomington, the number 8 Bearcats come to town. And Dustin, this is a game that should be interesting in a number of ways because Indiana needs to get back to playing football that looks like they're winning, that they're capable of competing in the Big Ten East. They have not played that yet. Cincinnati, on the other hand, they need this win because they've heard nothing about not playing anyone, not playing a good enough schedule, not doing enough. Well, you go into on the road to a Big Ten opponent that is considered a challenger in the Big Ten East. That's exactly what they want. So this is a game that is needed to be won by both squads in a big-time way.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look first at the Cincinnati side of it, this is a chance for a group of 5 team to potentially make a college football playoff run because they have Indiana and I believe they have Notre Dame on the schedule. And then you look at the AAC, there's going to be some tough challenges that they have there. But what a way for them to kind of get the momentum rolling, not only to get a win over a good Indiana team, but to do so on the road when you're already a top 10 squad is going to look impressive to the selection committee further down the road. On the Indiana side, to me, you kind of washed away what happened in Iowa City. I mean, it doesn't go off the resume, but at the same time, I was impressed with how Indiana responded. I was curious to see how they might react when you got your bell rung, right? They were so high expectations, and to not even really be competitive in that game in Iowa City, I was curious to see if there was a hangover effect, if Indiana came out and looked lethargic, if they didn't perform well. That wasn't the case against Idaho. They had some issues that they still continue to need to work on, continue to need to clean up. But at the same time, they came out and they got a 21-point lead pretty quickly, took care of business, did what they needed to do. And if you get a win over a top 10 team in Cincinnati, you might be back in the top 25. All of a sudden, you are now considered to be a competitor in the Big Ten East again. Ohio State has had some issues, obviously, with their loss to Oregon. So this is a huge weekend. To me, this game is more important even than the Iowa game a few weeks ago, because this is the difference between getting a winning record going and having a chance to be a one-loss team heading into that Big Penn State game. And if you lose it, you're 1-2, and you're kind of scratching your head, and you wonder if this thing can get off the rails. And they're going to have fan support. They had a great turnout from the students and from the fans at Idaho. The game sold out this weekend. I expect a great crowd. So that'll give them a little bit of an extra energy, a little bit of an extra boost. But, yeah, huge game this weekend in Bloomington, one of the biggest ones we've seen in a while.
You know, I hate to say it, but this is probably I don't want to say the biggest home game Indiana's had in 40 years. It's the biggest non-conference game they've had in 40 years. But it's also one of the biggest games because it is a game that will propel them in a way. It's not conference game, so it doesn't have that kind of weight. But the fact of the things that you mentioned, the sold-out crowd, that if they win in front of that sold-out crowd, they secure their affections going forth. If they lose, then they see them as a team that can't compete with the big boys, and I think you're going to lose those fringe participants. That's who Indiana needs. Indiana needs those fringe ticket holders that aren't coming every week, that aren't making that drive. And that's what you can get right here. And that's the difference in elevating. It's one of the things in elevating your program is you got to have solid, consistent fan support.
And the other part of this, too, is if you don't win this game, I fear that the national perception is going to be Indiana was a one-hit wonder. This was a team that had a really good season in a year that was, affected by a pandemic. How good are they really? How far is Tom Allen really taking this program? And that's not certainly something that I believe, but I think that when you turn on ESPN's College Game Day or when you turn on Fox's Big Noon Kickoff, that's definitely going to be a conversation moving forward because you had two of your biggest games, and if you lose both of them and one of them is in a blowout fashion, that Iowa game, then people are going to seriously start to wonder how good you were last season and whether or not this Indiana program is really on the rise or whether it just took advantage of a unique circumstance in 2020. So it's hugely important. They have to be competitive. As you mentioned, if you don't win this game and even worse, if you don't even look competitive, if it looks like it did in that Iowa game, then you're going to start to lose a lot of fans and hopes of other sellouts are going to be by the wayside, and people are going to start looking towards Mike Woodson and the start of the college basketball season. So This is a huge game, huge non-conference game. Again, the great thing about Indiana, if you want to look at this on the positive side, is that your loss to Iowa that's a non-division opponent, right? So you still control your own destiny in terms of the Big Ten and trying to get to Indianapolis because you still have all your Big Ten East opponents ahead. So they do control their own destiny, but I think in order for them to kind of generate that momentum, get back on track and say, you know what, we're not a one-hit wonder. We are here to stay, and kind of create that momentum heading into games against Penn State, against Michigan State, against Ohio State, a very front-loaded schedule. They have to get a win on Saturday. Yeah,
I agree, and looking forward to that. I think that, as you said, I don't think that this Indiana team is good. They are defensively, they're very good. There's no question about that to me. Offensively, I think that they're good, but I had a question or a topic that came up last night. I forget who I was talking with, but how far does Tom Allen go with Michael Penix? Where's that line that says, man, we've got to make a change here? Because he is the starting quarterback, and there's no quarterback controversy at this moment other than the one we're creating. And I'm not trying to create that. It's just, It is what it is. He's not been productive, and he wasn't productive last week against a low-level team, but they weren't asked a lot of because they didn't have the ball a lot. Now, on the other hand, that is something that was key to Murray State being tied with Cincinnati 7-7 at the halftime last week. Murray State, because they kept the ball out of Cincinnati's hands. They ran just a controlled offense. We haven't seen Indiana have the ability to do that a lot yet. The running game has looked pretty good, but it's that passing game that is not complemented quite enough to sustain those drives. And not that they haven't had any, they did, but they need sustained drives against Cincinnati and let that defense do what they do. That's how Indiana is going to win this game. The offense has to stay on the field.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the running game looked better, but you still have to look at, they only averaged 3.5 yards per carry against an Idaho team. And to me, that's concerning because you should be averaging about 4.5 to 5 yards per carry against that kind of defense. So I do have some concerns in terms of the run game. But the bigger issue to me is I don't even put so much of this on Michael Penix as I do the offensive play calling. He cannot be asked to throw the ball 15, 20 yards down the field every single time and hope that that's going to be – I mean, the game's going to look like it did against Iowa if that's the offensive game plan. He can't just, stand back there and try to chuck it downfield 15, 20 yards and pick up that kind of yardage. They're going to have to do a little bit of the dink and dunk. They're going to have to establish the run game. They're going to have to move him out of the pocket. As much as we've talked about he can't be running, that has to be some sort of a threat to pick up at least 3 or 4 yards to keep the defense honest. So there are a lot of concerns. I want to see a little bit more. I'm not ready to pull the plug on Michael Penix yet or talk about the quarterback controversy. I think it falls more on Nick Sheridan to put Michael Penix in a better situation.
Yeah, but how? When you're not having – part of that is you've got to have good offensive line play. That's been another issue for Indiana. And there's no excuse for that one because this is a veteran line. This is a 2-deep line. This is the line that had I think there's one transfer. They made a move at center last week that seemed to show dividends with Zach Carpenter. But this is a veteran line. They made some changes, but you can't have problems on the line, and I don't understand how they are having problems with the offensive line this deep already. You had all of spring, you had all of fall camp, and with these veterans, and you've got to shore up some issues. That's a little befuddling to me, but that's issue number one because we've seen Stephen Carr. He's got the talent. He's got burst ability. He got out, got some good runs. That was something Stevie Scott did not have the ability to do. I never saw Stevie Scott make a 26-yard run. I think I saw 2 of those the other last Saturday from Stephen Carr. So he has that ability. He's got the ability to be the good complement running game. They've got to get these other passes going. They haven't thrown deep. They haven't thrown deep hardly at all this year. Now, part of that's on the line, but the receiving corps doesn't look as in sync this year as they were last year. Ty Freifogel, of course, an All-American who is one of the best in the country, hasn't been much of a factor at all.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is Indiana's offensive line is probably more recruited to in terms of finesse, because when you look at what Kalen DeBoer did offensively, and obviously he wasn't there long enough to recruit that kind of offensive line, but they got the ball out of the hands of the quarterback quickly. They were trying to make quick plays on bubble screens and short passes and things like that, and so they didn't have a power offensive line. And now it seems to me like they're trying to establish some sort of power run game without that kind of offensive line. So it's experienced and it's deep, but I don't know if it's built to be a run first type of offensive line, and I think that's the big concern.
So we got to take a quick break.
Rushing game, yeah.